Hi guys, and welcome to the prediction video for tonight's UEFA Europa Conference League final between Real Betis and Chelsea, where we're going to predict to see who is going to come away as the second set of European champions after Spurs won the Europa League last week. And then, of course, we have the Champions League final at the weekend between Inter Milan and PSG to see who becomes the Champions League champions and the elite of the elite when it comes to European football. But I also wanted to discuss at the end of this video whether I think the Conference League is being run correctly. But before we get to that, let's get into a little bit of a deep dive of both Betis and Chelsea's seasons. So starting off with Betis, domestically in La Liga, they finished 6th. 5 points clear of Celta Vigo, but they were a long way behind Villarreal and Athletic Bilbao for the Champions League places. But regardless of what happens to Betis in the final, they have secured a Europa League place for next season. Obviously, the prize for winning the Conference League is a Europa League place for next season as well. So regardless of what happens in that case, Betis are in the Europa League. So they've had a pretty good season from their standpoint of things. Sometimes, of course, they do squeeze into those Champions League places, but the Europa League is usually where they are about, not potentially Conference League. On to Chelsea, of course, they finished in 4th place in the Premier League this season, a big improvement from last season, of course, and they've gotten themselves Champions League football. So regardless of what happens in this one, they're not even going to be playing Europa League football next season. They are in the Champions League. They finished 3 points ahead of Newcastle, but of course they finished outside of the top 3 places behind Man City, Arsenal and the champions Liverpool. But in the end, they were so far behind Liverpool that it didn't really matter whether they finished 2nd, 3rd, 4th or 5th to get Champions League football, which I think everybody has kind of covered, that it's ridiculous the amount of places that some of these nations are getting in the Champions League next season. I mean, 6 places. It's the European Super League in disguise. I think we can all agree on that, because you either need to rename the competition to something else, because it's not the Champions League anymore. You've got champions of domestic competitions that have to qualify to get into the Champions League, which is just ludicrous in my opinion. But I get, obviously, the standpoint of, you could argue, well, you want the Champions League to be as strong as possible with Europe's best teams. I get that, but it shouldn't be called the Champions League if you're just going to let 6 English teams into the competition and 5 Spanish teams and so on and so forth. It's not the Champions League anymore if that's the case. So, on to how they've gotten on in the Conference League this season. Betis have actually had to play one more round than Chelsea, because Betis didn't finish in the top 8. Chelsea, of course, finished first in the top 8. So Betis had to play against Ghent in the playoff round of 32, and they came through comfortable 4-0 winners on, 3-1 winners on aggregate. In the end, they won the first leg 3-0 away from home, so, it's kind of a formality at that point. And then Ghent managed to get a goal back and get a little bit of pride, but it wasn't enough for them to go through, and Betis got through that tie relatively comfortably. On to the second tie versus Vitoria, which wasn't as comfortable in the first leg, the 2-2 draw at home, but then they went away from home and completely destroyed them, winning 6-2 on aggregate, and that was their next tie, which was the round of 16 at that point. On to the quarter-finals at this point, which I have no clue how to pronounce this team properly. Jagiellonia or something like that, where they win 3-1 on aggregate again. Maybe they should be winning more comfortably, or maybe I'm doing them a disservice at that point. But 3-1, they still go through the tie relatively comfortable. And this was their first proper test, I would say. Fiorentina, who have been the Conference League finalists in every single Conference League that there's been so far. So Betis have stopped Fiorentina from being in the Conference League final by winning the tie after extra time in the second leg, as you could see in the semi-final, and they have prevented Fiorentina from getting to the final. On to Chelsea, arguably their biggest test en route to the final came in their first tie against Copenhagen, who have had a bit of an up and down European season overall. Scottish football fans will know that Copenhagen played both Hearts and Kilmarnock in the Conference League stages at some point this season. They struggled against both. Yes, they came away winners in both ties, but they did struggle to get the job done in both, and they got undone against Chelsea in the end, with Chelsea coming away 3-1 winners on aggregate. Legia Warsaw, comfortable away from home for Chelsea in the quarters, 3-0 winners. And then they did get beat at home, similar to Betis with Ghent, but the tie was already wrapped up at that point, coming away 4-2 winners on aggregate. And then the semi-final, Djurgården, where it could have been more comfortable at home, but the tie was already wrapped up, 4-1 away from home, so 5-1 on aggregate in the end. So, in terms of who I think is going to win, I think Chelsea are probably going to come away maybe 2-3-0 winners. I think that's no disservice to Betis. I just think Chelsea are in a stronger position than them at the moment, and I think Chelsea will come away the winners. But getting to the Conference League itself, what I mentioned at the start of the video, is it run properly? I don't think it's run anywhere near properly. They introduced the Conference League, and when they said it was coming in, it was to give teams that don't usually have a chance of getting to Europe, or don't usually have a chance in Europe, of winning a European competition. And out with Olympiacos winning it last time around, the winners have come from the top 5 leagues. In my opinion, I don't think any team from the top 5 league should be allowed in the Conference League for a start. I mean, Chelsea winning the Conference League is a farce. It should never be something that's happening. And Betis winning the Conference League should also not be happening as well. These teams should be competing in Europa League minimum, in my opinion, because the top 5 leagues should not, and I'm not going to change my mind on this, should not be allowed to compete in the Conference League. And I don't think a lot of fans of teams in the top 5 leagues would be too bothered if they weren't allowed to compete in the Conference League either. The money is way less than the other 2 European competitions. The Champions League is where they all want to be, and you get that by winning the Europa League as well. Winning the Conference League just gets Europa League. And Chelsea's case, they win the Conference League, yeah, great, it's a European trophy, but they're in the Champions League anyway. So I do not believe that the top 5 leagues should be allowed in the Conference League. I don't know if people are going to agree with that as well. And then, you know, even potentially you're looking at the top 8 leagues maybe not being allowed in. I don't know. But definitely the top 5 leagues not being allowed into the Conference League is something that I think UEFA should revisit going forward, especially if they're just going to let every Tom, Dick and Harry into the Champions League with 6 places. You should not be in the Conference League at that stage. So that's my thoughts on the competition as a whole and the final tonight. Let me know if you disagree or agree in the comments below. Thank you very much for the new viewers and subscribers. We passed 8,000 subscribers this morning, which is absolutely magnificent. Thank you very much for that. If you are new around here, please consider checking some of the other content out on the channel, liking and subscribing, and I'll catch you in the next one.